Okay, good afternoon everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Audit and Governance Committee today, Monday 12th of June 2023. Just like to inform everyone that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. First of all, we're going to go to Callum, and I'd like to welcome Callum to the committee, who's now taken on full-time responsibility for looking after us, and we're very pleased to have you. Could you advise us of any apologies today, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Roberts and Councillor Brown, with Councillor Jackson and Councillor Smith-Haynes acting as a substitute. Thank
you for that. Members will perhaps recall that we had a recalibration of the membership of the committee. I think my maths is quite good, but I still don't understand why we've gone from 7.3 to 8.2 when it all seemed to be the same type of numbers, but I'm sure when I read it properly I'll understand that. So we have some people who've left the committee. Councillor Pengelly, I'd like to thank him for he had very valuable contribution during his time on this committee, especially with the linkage with his chair responsibility, so that was really helpful. And Councillor Addison and Prentice. So we've had some new members. Councillor Eakins is now joining us and is acting as Vice Chair. Councillor Jackson was mentioned that he's formally stepping in as a substitute today, but at the next meeting he will be assuming full committee responsibilities. And Councillor Anzo, who has often been here as a substitute, is now a full member of the committee. So that's quite a few changes which have happened there. If I'll move on to the other welcomes, we've got quite a number of other people here today. I'd like to welcome Yvonne and Adele and members of our auditors who are going to be very busy telling us about Corby, and our 20 audits have been completed since the last one. Other officers joining us, thank you for your attendance. Moving on to item 2, is there any declarations of interest from any members that they need to make today? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of April 2023. I think at this point I'll come in because there was an additional paper reported, which was a housing repairs summary, as requested by members. And Yvonne is with us today, and perhaps she may like to add a few words, and we'll come back with possibly some questions before we go on to formally doing the minutes. If I could just hand over to Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as advised, this is a follow-up from the previous audit committee, and there's a number of questions, I believe, Chair and members just wanted a bit more clarification on. So paper has been submitted. I will go through that quite quickly and then open the floor to any questions if you have them. So there was a question around the adoption of the housing strategy for NNC. You're aware that we don't currently have an NNC housing strategy, and also the decision was made to wait for my arrival, which I'm quite grateful for, because it means I can get fully involved in terms of the development of that strategy. In between then, there was a housing strategy light that was developed, I think, just as you vested. And the decision was made that should look at all of Northamptonshire and North NNC district, rather than just the areas that have housing stock, example Kettering and Corby. So we have agreed that we would go along with that ethos in terms of looking at the housing needs for all of the area, and particularly of the areas that don't have any legacy or housing stock there. And we'll be basing that on the needs assessment that was undertaken in 2022, but also any of the census information or any information that we're picking up in terms of additional intelligence about housing need. And that will include looking at things on the housing waiting list and demand, and also looking at the types and numbers and sizes of properties that people are actually applying for, so that we get the needs assessment correct. The next question was around the HRA and the business plan. So you will be aware that with all the different organisations come together, Corby did have a 30-year business plan. Kettering doesn't at the moment in time and doesn't have to the same level of degree as Corby has. So we are now in the process of creating a new Northamptonshire HRA business plan, and we will be updating on the legacy business plans to ensure that that comes together. Part of the strategy, though, and the housing strategy will involve the merging of the two HRAs. I know that recently that we've been looking at closing off the legacy accounts and all that to do that, and that will inform the medium-term financial strategy going forward as well. I need to make you aware that that will be a large piece of work. We need to make sure that we've got that absolutely right in terms of merging all of the different accounts and financials and costs into creating one complete HRA going forward. And being able to do that, we already have started a scoping exercise, so that was done at the end of 2022. Again, waiting for my arrival to be able to move that forward. And it will be a piece of work in terms of all the legislation and regulatory issues that sit around that we are very likely to look at commissioning out that piece of work to bring us forward in terms of delivering a single HRA. In the last meeting that I came, I think there was a mention about that if we didn't meet the TSM standards, tenancy services measures, that could be a risk for us. I'm pleased to say that having met with the teams that we are compliant with the 12 TSM measures that are required by government in terms of the regulatory framework. And as part of that, we're also looking at undertaking a STAR survey during this financial year. And those questions will align with the TSM and the standard measures to make sure that we are capturing the information and the data that residents actually need and are making a difference to residents' lives as well as being compliant with our new regulator. I've listed for you on the table, I thought it would be helpful for information, the actual 12 standards that we will be regulated and compared against, and they are there with just some narrative along the side as to where they are, and that information comes to me on a monthly basis. So I am able to ensure the committee that we will have data in terms of their standards ready to be compliant and complying with the audit requirements of April 2024 in terms of reporting. We also are looking at adapting our membership to the housing network to make sure that also we have some comparative data and we can benchmark against other organisations. We've also in there decided to put in some additional measures which are around repairs. So we've started to put in satisfaction around repair surveys, improvement work satisfaction survey, and also a new tenant satisfaction survey in terms of when a new tenant moves into their property. So those were the outstanding queries and questions that we had from the last audit committee. I'd actually recommend that the members of the committee take note of the recommendation, the information received in the report, and whether I would be able and to bring back to you an updated report in December to show you the progress on any of those issues that remain outstanding for you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for that. If I could look to members and see if they've got any questions. Firstly, I'll go to Councillor Anslow and then Councillor Lee. Thank you.
Thank you for that, for the information there. But in particular, so the list there of TSMs, collected from tenant perception surveys, is that all from our housing stock in Kettering and Corby? Or does it include private rented accommodation housing that people are also using?
So this one predominantly would be for council housing tenants.
Right.
That's the regulatory requirement in terms of looking at that. We could do a second satisfaction survey in terms of residents who are in our temporary accommodation stock or using other stock.
I think that would be really useful because, we are using more and more private rented for people as the number of social houses are not available and we're not necessarily rebuilding the ones. So I'd like to see if that could be instigated, that there was some sort of survey of private rent as well. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, if you'd like to raise your question.
Thank you. Will councillors receive the responses given to the survey, because at the moment all we have to go on is our casework, and there used to be a tenants forum on which councillors were represented, and now we are not even allowed to have the minutes, anonymised minutes of the tenant advisory panel, so we are completely in the dark. So at what time, you say the questions still need to be approved, that was in May. When will the survey be carried out, and can the responses please come to this committee, or can they be distributed to councillors, please? Thank you.
Okay, so we anticipate undertaking the STAR survey by the end of this financial year. In terms of the responses, they will be an overarching collated report would come, so we can give you the overarching headline figures. We probably wouldn't be able to give you the detail that sits underneath that information. I'm not sure of the decision that made the decision as to why you didn't get some of the other information, but we could give you the overarching headline report in terms of what the STAR survey is actually telling us about the service.
Very briefly, thank you, Chair. The end of this financial year, so the survey will only be carried out in March next year, 2024?
No, it has to be completed by the end of the financial year, so we're committed to do it before March 2024.
That's a very long time. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think I've got a question from Michael, thank you.
Yeah, hi. I think last time there was some concern about the backlog of repairs and this kind of thing. So I was just wondering, it'll be a common theme from me, if we can get an update on numbers on a relatively regular basis, because my concern is if it's every 6 months or so, then that's quite a long time to see any changes in what's happening. So I know you said you are giving an update going forward, but if we could make that relatively regular, and also I'd quite like potted, you know, like an executive summary, because there's a lot to read, and I'm concerned that I miss the important points on a lot of these documents. So, and I will mention this in other things as well, almost an executive summary saying, these are the numbers, this were the numbers last time I reported, change, you know, that kind of thing, and the trend. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I had a number of comments, and one of those links into what you've said there. I think what we've got to recognise, first of all, I can see that you're moving this forward, which is good, but I think we've got to recognise we've got some big exposures here. There's been no housing strategy, and we will be in year 4 by the time we're going to get it. Yep. And if you add in the transition year, it's quite a long time to be without a housing strategy. I think we've still got a significant exposure with not having a single HRA, because that's your financial model. So the financial model is not backing up our approach to housing. So all I would ask is that we try and do this as soon as reasonably possible. I get what you're saying there about the consolidation. In terms of the regulatory requirements for the Registrar of Social Housing, I take on board the point, it's towards the end of the year, you know, so I think we should endeavour to get this sooner rather than later. We should be, you know, if it was in a steady state, we'd be expecting to get these STAR reports well throughout the year, not right at the end of the year. And of course, these are only the tenant satisfaction measures that are measured by the tenants, not by the ones which are measured by the landlord. So there's 10 of those, and it's silent on those. And I'd like to see an update on where we are with the 10 measures. And the 2 of those, the first 2 of those, for example, I don't want to go through them all, but they're like meeting the decent home standards. I'd like to know if we're meeting the decent home standards. Repairs within timescales. This relates back to what Michael's just said. I was expecting that we were going to get some, you know, trajectory of what was happening after last time, because you know, I appreciate you're only just in post, but we wanted to see that we was moving in the right direction. And so I would request that we get some more frequent updates. So if we could come back to the next committee, I think I'd find that really useful on those particular areas. I don't know if you have any comments that you'd like to make on those observations.
No, I'm absolutely willing to do that. Provide you with that information on there. If there's any queries around that, then do please feel free to contact me separately.
Those STAR surveys, you like an early warning system. I don't want us to get to March and find out we're going to have a regulatory intervention because we've got a serious problem. I think Councillor Anzo would like to raise
I just
a
want to
point,
come
and then
back
I'll go to Councillor
actually.
Jelly.
Yeah, thank you. Picking up on what you've just been saying there, because the actual providers, so if you have a survey of the people who are providing this, so in case of Kettering and Corby, that's who we're looking at, their voids, we're looking at how long it takes for them to be repairs done. But there's half of North Northants not included in that case. And I'd be really interested to know what the, for example, Greatwell Homes, what their, if they were asked, what their survey would be, their response, because Wellingborough doesn't have social housing that's owned by us. And it would be good to know they took on the Wellingborough Homes as it was, became Greatwell Homes. And I'd like to know where they are with that stock. Yeah.
So that would be separate outside of the STAR survey.
Okay.
But one of the things I am looking at is organise a meeting with the registered providers within the area, so that we can get an understanding of some of the issues that they face, that we can learn best practice, that we can learn from each other, and also work in a more joined up way. And obviously to help me, being new within the area, about looking at all of the partners and how we can work together. So we are looking at bringing together a registered providers forum, which is providers not only within NNC but perhaps even within the the East Midlands, to actually look at best practice and how everybody's doing something, and make sure we're aligning that one organisation's decision isn't necessarily negatively impacting, or where we can support each other in kind of development initiatives on there. So that will be something I will be taking forward as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really helpful that you're incorporating those registered providers, because whilst they're responsible in those areas, we only have the HRA for Kettering and Corby, but we have the strategy for the whole of North Northamptonshire, and they are part of that. So that's really helpful. I'll go to Councillor Jelly now, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the TSMs, you've got a whole collection of surveys that you had back from, obviously, residents of council houses. Everyone is responded to with a proportion of respondents who report that they're satisfied with the overall service. Do we know what that proportion was? You might have, if you've got, 8,000 tenants, 4,000 tenants, whatever it is, if you've only got 50 come back and a proportion of those 50 is 3 people and they say they're happy with the overall experience, that doesn't give you a clear view of all of our council house tenants. Do we have a breakdown on what those proportions and percentages were?
I don't, I'm afraid, have the breakdown of the historical data. Obviously, with me going forward, it's important for me to get a baseline of where we are in terms of our service and the perception. So for me as well, it's important for me that we get that STAR survey across the line, as quickly as possible, but we need to make sure we're asking the right questions. The reason you want to make sure you're asking the right questions is the STAR survey relates to the service they are receiving from the housing service, not from the wider council. We just need to make sure that we tailor the questions so that we can get that specific information that will help us inform. So, for example, I've known previously where we've asked a resident, well, were you happy and satisfied with the outcome of your antisocial behaviour case, for example? And they've said no. And they've said no because they wanted the neighbour evicted. What actually happened was we abated the nuisance, all of the problems stopped, and actually there were no further problems. They just didn't like each other. And so you have to be careful when you write these questions that you are being able to drill down to the data that will give you the true outcome of what's happening, but will help you inform the delivery of your service. So I know that the questions have gone through to the panel, and for me being new, it's really important for me to get that information quickly through and making sure we're making correct assessments on it, because that all helps inform our development strategy, our resident engagement strategy, and our development strategy, and how I can support you as members around the table of making this, housing service that we have the best that we possibly have, and make sure it's delivering for our residents. So yes, we still need to do a little bit of work, and I am mindful that the STAR survey is late, But I'm also mindful that if we rush it and it's asking the wrong questions, then neither is that any more helpful to us either. Yeah. So I will expedite it, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to you with more of a confirmation of the time that when that will come out, and also narrative to residents as why it's really important that they, you know, respond to the survey and that we get their views.
Yeah, I think that would be good actually through you, Chair, because I think it would give a clearer picture of what our residents think about the services they're getting from the housing team. So if we could get something in the future which could give us an indication of, you know, what the percentage of return to respondents was, I think that would be very helpful. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Eakins.
Yeah, just a quick one. I know that we've mentioned the timescale for the repairs and how we can get that shortened by some way. Next one is on voids. Do you know what the average day time for a void turnaround is?
I believe a target's 54 and we were on 62. We also, I think when I came to the scrutiny panel, I advised that I've set up a workshop to actually look at all of the components of our voids, to actually find out what it is we still need to do to improve those targets. So some of them, you know, are we doing things, you know, one after another, where actually we can, you know, slot those together in sync and do 3 or 4 things all at the same time. So I've started a working group that's actually looking at all of our voids. In that as well, we'll be speaking to some of our residents who've recently moved into some of our properties. We're also going to be looking at how we allocate those properties and what we do with the notice period. So again, when a resident leaves, when we know that they're leaving, they serve us a notice and they give us 28 days. It's really important that we get into the property and do our initial inspection within that 28 days, because that gives us an idea whether it's going to be a minor void or a major void. Obviously, you can't know everything that's going on in that property until some of the furniture and everything else is out there. But it also offers us an opportunity to say to residents, well, you know, obviously you need to get the grass cut. Can we help with that? You've got a lot of furniture. Are we able to help you move? Are you aware that you could use this company or a voluntary agency can help you? So that we can help them with that transition going forward as well, and also speak to any tenants who've caused willful damage to our property. So we're doing those workshops now, and that's including colleagues from the allocations team, it's including colleagues from repair, it's including colleagues from housing management, and I have actually spoke to Greatwell Homes around how they're doing their voids and their repairs. I actually sit on the East Midlands Committee for the Chartered Institute of Housing, so again I'm speaking to all of those colleagues about what is best practice, you know, what are other people doing that is making a difference in terms of bringing our properties back, and also are we speaking to residents and letting them know what they need to do when they end their tenancy, what they need to do within those 28 days, because this is a partnership as well in terms of doing that and how we allocate properties. Another conversation we had recently with Greatwell Homes was, do we do multiple viewings? So, you know, do we know in advance if we viewed on a Monday that person doesn't want it, are we geared up on the Tuesday to get the second applicant in to be able to view the property? So all of those components I'd like to reassure you that we are currently looking at and I'm working on at the moment.
So just to clarify then, so you're saying that our void time at the moment is 62 days?
I've got 62 days was the average information that I had.
That's from when the property's been vacated?
That's key to key. So that's from when it's been vacated to when it's been relet. Which is
it's a long time. The normal target's 14 to 21 days.
I'm not sure that's the target.
Well, that was the target when I was on Greatwell Homes Board, and they're not hitting it either.
Okay. I will double check the figures. That's my concern, the figures, but I'm confident they're not 14 days.
It's just that you're taking over 62 days to get a house that's back online.
But that does include any property that's a major void as well, so that will also can include some of our major voids that can take longer. So if you've got to do a deep clean, or there's other repairs that come within that, and also if a tenant turns down a property. So it can sound like a long period of time, but actually, you know, from what we know in terms of some competitors, it can't be that high. But also we're looking at bringing that back down. But I've never worked anywhere, and I've worked in housing for 30 odd years, that has had a exceptional voids time of 14 days, unless it's a new build, and they've had it brand new and it's been in 14 days. I'm not confident that that's what's happening. And also in voids time, people they change the dates in terms of when what they terms a void. So you may have some people that say that we will classify our voids time from when it's empty to when we've got the contractors in to when we've done the clean. That's very different from a key to key, from when the property comes back to us to when you actually have it relet. So it will depend on what your definition of a void time is as well. That will make some difference to the figures that you have reflected.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for attending and answering those questions. It's appreciated. I think we can recognise that you're having an impact and you're moving things forward. But I think what I'd like you to acknowledge is we've still got some concerns here, and we feel there's a sense of urgency. So I think if you can keep us informed, and I think some of the timescales lacked ambition that we have. So maybe if you ever think about those before you report back next time, because I think there could be more ambition there, and I think it'd be for the better long-term interest as well if we get some of those things done earlier. I'll just take one more question from Councillor Smith-Haynes. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, this may be, as I'm a substitute on this may be something that's already been covered, but I'm wondering what are the, how do you grade whether something's a minor repair or a major repair in order to get the void back online? I'd find it useful to know what the differences are, what the percentages are, and how long does it take for a normal, you know, if I moved out of my council house today, how long would it take to get that void filled?
I'm happy to bring that information back. I also note about the urgency, and I absolutely get that. But also I want to make sure that I, being new, I've been here all of 8 weeks now, want to make sure that I've got all of the correct information before I move forward. So yeah, I hope you can rest assured that I am progressing stuff, and I don't think it will wait till March 2024. But I think it's also key that as the new AD, I am very clear about what is happening within the service so that I can build on that foundation and make sure we're making the right decisions at the right time for you. And the survey is very important for me as well, because of course it gives me a baseline of what that service is and what it is that my teams has to do. So I will reassure you we will move as quickly as possible, and I hope you're reassured that we are making some movement already, and I appreciate that you have recognised that, Chair, already. Thank you.
Thank you. No pressure then. I think we've got to approve the minutes before we move off agenda item 3. So has anybody got any comments on any particular points in the minutes? If not, could I look for a proposer, Councillor Marks, and a seconder, Councillor Anslow? And if we could go to the vote, please. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4. This is me getting a little bit excited now, because this is the last of the audits that we inherited from when we took on this council. And so I'm quite excited, and I'd like to, before we get to this point, I know some of these papers came out quite late in the day, and we always ask for them to be out earlier, but I think in the circumstances I understand why, and it's reasonable because of the amount of work that's been undertaken by both our staff and some in particular, and the auditors has been huge, and I think we should recognise that. We will be giving you some questions on this, but I'd first of all like to recognise what you've done since the last meeting and got us to this point. So thank you, and thank you in particular to Claire and Liz for getting us to this point. I'd like to now hand over to Liz from our auditors, and if you could talk us through your interim audit results report and where we are and what needs to be done for us to be able to get signed off within a reasonable time frame. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So for those that don't know me, my name's Liz Jackson. I'm the partner from EY who'll be leading the audit. Due to a risk change in the profile of the audit, a partner called Janet Dawson will be signing it because the risk profile has increased and therefore it needs to be signed by an equity partner. But that's fine, that's kind of behind the scenes that for us to be dealing with, just adds another layer kind of in the review process. So apologies, yes, that this report did come out late. We wanted to get a up-to-date position as possible, so then the accounts for the next agenda item were kind of could be approved as needed from it. So we wanted to make sure that was the position that we brought to you today. So I'll just take you through the exec summary and kind of some of the key points in the report, and then I'll kind of open it up to questions for obviously more detail of the report. So from the audit plan I presented back at the February committee, we haven't changed any of the materiality or the performance materiality or the audit differences threshold at which I need to report to you. So they're all the same at 1.1 million, £500,000, and then £50,000 for any of the differences that then we bring to your attention. And then we're just moving on to kind of the audit differences. So there are a number of adjustments that are in the accounts that are the next agenda item, but it really was just to flag with you that you'll have seen from reading the detail report, the section with the audit report in remains empty, and that's because we haven't yet concluded sufficient work for me to confirm that the audit report that I will be issuing based on these accounts. The good news from where we were back in February is that I pretty much sat here and said, I think we will be qualifying the accounts. We're now at a position where a lot of work has been done with finance. We are, for those who kind of know audit in a background, we usually ask for kind of sourced evidence and source documentation is always our starting point. And we always kind of want the perfect source of an invoice, something from the supplier, a bank statement to prove the income, expenditure and the like. That just isn't possible at Corby. So it's taken a lot of work, and a particular thank you to the Assistant Director of Finance and Accountancy, because without her and her input on this audit and to get us there, we would not be where we are sat here today. We've had to do a lot of pragmatic things, which auditors don't usually say, because usually we're very black and white in our view and how we come at things. But we've done a lot of pragmatic work to where we don't have the evidence that we need to confirm the balance of the transaction that are in the Corby accounts. We've worked with finance to get a different source of assurance, shall we say, that isn't the perfect audit evidence that I would like to see, and that is why, when I come to the value for money conclusion, why that's kind of rated as it is. But actually we are getting to a place where we are closing down items. So on page 10, it might look like a large list, but probably 2 months ago, when we were due to come to you in April, that list was pretty much 100% incomplete. And therefore today, we've actually got quite a short list. And 2 of those items, cash and pension scheme liabilities, we've now closed over the last week from drafting the report to kind of finalising. And the areas that are in progress, PPE is the most, property, plant and equipment, so all your asset base, that is the area that's kind of most in progress, shall we say, for sat here today, but that's all to do with valuers and our judgments and my valuation expert and kind of the arguing of that. We have lots and lots of robust debates between the valuers and we're starting to conclude and close down on each of the asset types. So even that is moved significantly from where we were, and we're still working, but actually that is in a much better position than it was. For the other areas that are in that list, some have moved on further. Finance have provided a lot of information over the last week to us. We obviously need to review that and kind of make some judgments. As I said, it's not the most straightforward evidence, so we can't just give it to a trainee to tick through, because it isn't the tick through type evidence. It needs lots of judgment, and you have to think on every sample item and every kind of transaction assurance. Have we got enough? Do we need to do something different or more? So that's why it's going to take a little bit longer to kind of conclude the audit. But we're working through all those areas and continuing to work very closely with finance to close those down. I think there will be further adjustments to the accounts, but none of those will be the kind of the bottom line, as we call it, so the things that the council taxpayer actually worries about, the usable reserves. All of these are kind of accounting adjustments, as we would say, between things like debtors and creditors particularly. We think they'll move, but actually they're not the things that impact on your bottom line. So your out-term position won't change on the HRA or the general fund from the areas of the work that are outstanding. So that's the reason why we haven't issued an audit report as it stands, because they're dependent on where we get to and dependent on the level of evidence that we can be provided with. We can't necessarily conclude that, say, debtors or creditors, especially around your collection fund, are correct, and therefore when we have errors in our population sample, we then need to extrapolate that fail over the rest of the population. We wouldn't then amend on that, because obviously it's not a factual error. It is purely an auditor judgment, and kind of our calculation might be then different from your new auditor of Grant Thornton. Their calculation rate might be then different based on that. So it wouldn't be sensible to adjust your accounts, and therefore then we have to add up all of those to then see, do we have a material misstatement? We will work sensibly with officers to do the best to not get to a qualified audit report, but that is still a risk as we sit here today. I think we've got sufficient information and evidence, that it won't be a disclaimer. So for those, sorry, technological, for those kind of in the know, you get an unqualified, so it's a clean audit report saying your accounts are true and fair and they are correct and all the evidence has been provided that we need. You then get a second level, which is a limitation of scope. And that's to say that the accounts are all true and fair, except for this area that we can't quite get the audit evidence on. Or you get the worst case, which is a disclaimer, which then just says, we can't audit the accounts, we can't get sufficient information to give assurances over the balances and transactions, and therefore we're disclaiming the accounts. We were at that, which after a meeting with the chair and obviously finance in great detail, that's why we pulled the report last time and said actually we're going to keep working with finance to get to this position. So I think we're moved away from that worst case scenario, but we obviously need to conclude the work to get to the place where we will be eventually. That eventually, we are aiming to do it by the end of July. Finance would like it by the end of June, but I think I'm kind of realistic in the level of review and process that we need to go through. And as I've said, some of those judgment areas where we need to actually see what evidence have we got and can we live with it, but where is the grey line that we need to cross to be able to say yes or no to that source of assurance. So I think realistically, that would be by the end of July for a wrap-up, issue the report and kind of close down the Corby audit. Coming to the value for money, kind of based on what I've just been saying, we have got a significant weakness in the proper arrangements. So for those kind of aware of the value for money, there are 3 criteria that we look at: financial sustainability, governance, and then the economy and efficiency and effectiveness. The governance area, when I reported in the audit plan, we had a risk of significant weakness, and that was in relation to the bank reconciliations and the completion of those during 1920 and 2021. As we've kind of obviously gone through the audit over the last 3-4 months of solid working with kind of the finance team to deliver Corby, we've found 2 kind of further areas. One is obviously just the evidence and the internal controls are available at Corby at the time to underpin those financial statements. And the other one is around some of the risk register process. During 2021, the risk registers weren't reported to committees. They just weren't kind of being followed up or documented anywhere, and there's no evidence of challenge or risks being looked at in Corby. So we put all that together and said that actually that leads to a significant weakness in arrangements for Corby in a respect of governance in that bit. So that doesn't then impact on Northamptonshire going forward, kind of for those sat here kind of with that future lens on. This is purely looking back at what happened in Corby in 2021. So that will be a qualified value for money reporting in it. And when you see the audit report, obviously it includes a bit around the value for money and then the bit around the accounts. That bit will say that for governance, that there is a qualification because there is a significant weakness in the arrangements in Corby in 2021. That's a separate bit from the accounts. I won't go through the other reporting issues because that's obviously as read. We have identified some control deficiencies, and obviously that links to that governance point I've just made. And then just to say the audit differences that are reported in here, we've got one unadjusted difference, which will be in your letter of representation. And that's just because of the nature of it linking to the HRA and the general fund. We've agreed with officers as it stands that it's sensible not to amend that 475,000 because there is that bottom line impact I mentioned, and therefore you wouldn't want to be making that adjustment unless you very much needed to. So we're in agreement that that isn't amended if there are no other things that come up that would then tip you over the £1 million to then be into qualified report territory. The audit differences that are sat out in this report relate mainly to the debtors, to PPE, which there will be further PPE amendments when we've kind of got to that final position and agreed with the valuers, and then an adjustment for cash. There are further adjustments, and those that have got through the accounts as well in the final bit, there are more adjustments in that final table from finance than are in this report, and that's because I will be doing a final version report. Finance went through a lot of those adjustments last week. We just haven't fully processed those ourselves, and I wouldn't want to put them in my report until when I'm 100% happy with the adjustments as they're proposed. I have no reason to believe that Claire hasn't done it properly because her capital accounting and kind of accounting transactions are very good, but it's just I wouldn't want to sit here and say I've signed them off if I haven't. And then we just also have in the report a couple of projected misstatements, and that's where I was explaining earlier, when we do sample testing, when we have fails in our population, I then have to project that misstatement as if it was over the whole population of like a percentage, then what could be wrong. And we've got a creditors and an expenses one as it is. We don't amend for those because obviously that isn't a factual misstatement, and therefore we don't amend for them, so I've just flagged them for your attention. And I'll probably stop then, pause and let members question me.
Okay, thank you for that update. I just look to members, see if they've got any questions or comments, observations. No. Okay. What I was interested in was you're suggesting now that we look towards the end of July. How I've got a couple of questions. I've got a question for the next auditors and how that may impact on them. I know initially we thought we may be able to get this done by the end of June. And just want to understand what's changed there and just get the officer's view on that deadline as well. So if we go to you first and then Grant Thornton and then Claire.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So I think the end of July is reasonable because we Finance would like to shut down by the 30th of June, and I think that's us getting to a point where for every piece of information that's outstanding that we haven't yet concluded on, that actually then we need to make an assessment to say what is then the impact on our audit report. Can we then have any wriggle room? What can we move around to make the minimal impact on the audit report, which is obviously what we all want to get to. That will take time. There are some prior adjustments in the accounts that will be needed around PPE. There's already one in the accounts that you're approving today, potentially, on income and expenditure. We've not agreed to that prior adjustment, and we need to put that through our professional practice team. That all takes time. So I think if I sat here and said by the 30th of June, on the 12th, it's 100% impossible from my side, whereas the 30th of July gives us, we've got all the evidence, we know where we are, that gives us a month to make all those judgments, run it through our professional practice team. They have to sign off any consultation for any prior year change before we're allowed to issue the audit report. And I'll hand over.
Okay, Paul, can you just update on where that would leave you?
So obviously we've been quite flexible up until now. We've got resources in place from the beginning of July to do both the North Northamptonshire and the West Northamptonshire audit, but what we're finding is we've still got a lot of planning work to do on North Northamptonshire, so we can make a start on that. But also there are other distinct areas within the accounts that aren't impacted that we can make a start on. So, for example, the collection fund, we can start work on those until Corby's signed off. But obviously, there's also the county that needs to be signed off as well beforehand.
Okay, if I look to Claire and Janice to give their comments, please.
Yeah, whilst obviously we would like to have the account signed off by the end of June, obviously that's more in line for us to get all the outstanding audit queries finished and done, and to a point where we're not doing any more work on that, and we can just draw a line under it, and obviously then it's really over to Liz's team to review and come back to us with any further adjustments if required. I think the bigger thing for us, whilst obviously we're sitting here talking about Corby where council accounts, it's actually the county council accounts have more significant impact, which I don't think we'll actually be looking to get them signed till the end of July anyway.
Okay, thanks for that. I was going to come to that one perhaps at the end and get the auditor's view on the county. Just your view on end of July, please, Janice.
Yeah, it's just trying to be pragmatic about this, really. I think we've come so far in order to get an opinion for Corby, and the work that's been done by both the external auditors, Ernst Young and Claire and the team particularly, within finance to actually get to this point compared to, as Liz was saying, from where we're in February is tremendous. So we just want to get this extra month so that both parties are completely happy with what's been signed off, and that's really vitally important for us that the external audit is happy with that, because that's the assurance that our new external auditors can take from that as well as they work on through. But as Claire mentioned, our biggest concern really in terms of what we need to do for the position going over into NNC's accounts is what we are bringing forward from the County Council, which will by far dwarf Corby with regard to the balances that are coming forward, so we can actually start those accounts.
Okay, can you just update us from your perspective on county for 2020-21, please?
Yes, Chair. I'm obviously not part of the audit team, but I am aware, obviously, of the ongoing audit. I think there's a specific issue that is being resolved on county that is kind of outside of the accounts, from what I can gather, and that will need to be closed down before it can be signed. But I think, as Claire said, that looks to be by the end of July. And I think there is a timing, because the signing of that audit by Janet Dawson, she has a leave break over the summer, and therefore it's kind of end of July or we're into September, which is why we've kind of got the hard deadline for us for the 30th of June, for us to then sign by the 30th of July is our absolute cut-off.
Okay, I'll just check there's no further questions from what's been presented there. in item 5, we'll be addressing our minds as to whether we delegate this responsibility, but I think we just formally note these reports today. So if we get a proposer for Councillor Marks and a seconder, Councillor Eakins, and I've just asked everybody to note that just to show. Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you for that update. And obviously, integrally linked to that is the agenda item 5, which is the statement of accounts for 2021 for Corby. There's a paper which has been provided by Claire, and I'll ask Claire to present this and then lead us into the proposal for the clearance of these, and then obviously that links through to the audit sign-off as well. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So what we have in this report today is a revised set of draft accounts. As we've already said, they are not the final accounts, and they are obviously still subject to audit. So what we have here is a completion of the draft set of accounts in returns, including now significant variances that now impact on the accounts, mainly that have come out of delays that we've seen in previous years. And basically what we are seeing, just to give you a bit of a background to this audit, is a combination of the impact of COVID and transfer of Corby Borough Council into the new unitary in terms of resourcing. We've also had an audit that now spans 2 years past the end of the year that we're looking at, which also causes its own issues, that we have to include things that have escalated through financial years 2.5 years past the year-end date, and they have also to be included into the accounts and obviously impact debtors and creditors in particular, as you've seen. So those that have been reviewed in 2022-23 as part of North Northamptonshire are now obviously being impacted and shown in the accounts for 2021. So as we've moved through this, obviously what we now also have is a set of adjustments that we've now shown in Appendix B for your information. What I've tried to do is to go through what these adjustments have done to the primary statements of the accounts, together with any impacts on the general fund and HRA reserves. So I've tried to highlight to you where the significant impacts are happening through the accounts, and obviously lots of stuff that has gone through in terms of amendments, technical adjustments, disclosures, and reclassifications potentially through the accounts as well. What we have seen is a lot of adjustments that have gone through, but a lot of them, as I've said, are presentation or casting errors or disclosure requirements, and the actual impact so far on the reserves is only £149,000 to the general fund. So I think, there has been a significant amount of audit work. I'd love to take the credit for this myself. Unfortunately, there is a team that are working with me and have worked very diligently to try to get all the audit information that we've now provided to EY in order to actually take us into a position where we feel that we can actually now close down the audit. So we have made significant inroads into this audit, and I think, it is thanks to that team in persisting in getting all that information out from whatever various avenues we can explore, adapt to, and obviously provide to EY. So I think, it's essential that we do obviously recognise that, and it has been an unusual audit, I think, in terms of the timeline. I think that has also had a significant impact on these accounts as well. So what I would conclude is that obviously this is a draft set of accounts. It is still subject to audit, and we would obviously like to move to the recommendations where we do seek to get delegated authority to finalise these set of accounts with adjustments that we are looking to do to the accounts that will not impact the general fund and HRA. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I just looked at members to see if they've got any questions or comments, queries. Councillor Level.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm uncomfortable with approving this set of accounts at this stage. We've heard in the last 10 minutes or so quite a lot of information about what's still to be done in terms of auditing, the judgments to be made, assets to be valued, those sorts of things. I just think that the approval is actually premature, and as a chartered accountant, I can't support that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so I don't know if the auditors have got anything to add to the discussion, well, the points raised on the accounts. Now, what we have to do now is, there's a recommendation there. What isn't in there is we need to have a strict, in my opinion, we have to have a strict time frame within which to do this, because we can't say you can have delegated authority, and I acknowledge Councillor Level's concerns, and that will be reflected in the vote. So what I would add in there is that there's a deadline of 31st of July, and then if it goes beyond that, I would suggest that would not be appropriate to go beyond that point. So I'll adjust the recommendation and we'll deal with it thus. So the first part of the recommendation is to approve the draft statements of the Council for financial year 2021 for the Corby Borough Council, subject to the conclusion of the audit, and that there are no material adjustments that impact on the Council's usable reserves. Could I look for a proposer for that, please? Councillor Jelly and seconder, Councillor Marks. If we could go to the vote, please. All those in favour, please show. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against? That's 5 and 3. And abstentions? Okay, so that's carried 5-3 with 1 abstention. I'll go to the second recommendation now. The recommendation is adjustments required to the draft statement of accounts in relation to Corby Borough Council is delegated to the Chair of Audit and Governance in consultation with the Council's Executive Director of Finance and Performance up to 31st of July 2023. So that puts a timeline in that. Could I look for a proposer for that, please? Councillor Eakins and seconder, Councillor Jelly. All those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, that's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. I understand that this is a difficult thing to deal with, and I recognise why people sometimes would feel uncomfortable in voting in favour of that. But I hope we're now in the position. We've got that deadline, we've extended it a little, and let's hope we'll finally get it over the line and move on to Grant Thornton. No pressure. Okay, thank you for that. That draws to a conclusion item 5. Then we have probably one of the most busy internal audit progress reports I've seen under agenda item 6, which is very good because it's getting us to a good position to look at the annual. Thank you. Annual position. I'll invite Rachel to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you say, this is the latest progress report on the delivery of the Internal Audit Service. So obviously, during the period since the last committee meeting, primarily we have been finalising reports from the 21, 22, 23 plan. So that's the majority of this report obviously concludes on that work. We've also provided an update on starting the new work for the new financial year in 23-24 on page 22, with all of those assignments now underway, which we'd scheduled for the first quarter of the year. So it is quite a lengthy report this time, so I don't intend to go through it line by line, but I will take out some of the key points for members of the committee. So within the report, as usual in section 3.1, there's an overview of all of the reports which have been finalised since the last meeting. And that runs through all the way to page 42 of the papers as well. So in total, there were 20 reports which had been finalised, which obviously, as the Chair says, sets us up well for the next item on the agenda of the annual internal audit plan report and opinion. So within those reports that have been finalised, all have received opinions of at least satisfactory assurance. So I don't need to bring to the committee's attention any areas of limited assurance in relation to audits finalised in this period. What I would highlight to members is that we have included within the papers updates on reports that have been finalised that were follow-ups of limited assurance reports from the previous financial year, which we concluded in 22-23. So those are mentioned on page 31. As an example, we have revisited the deprivation of liberty safeguards audit, which received a limited assurance opinion in the previous financial year. That has raised to a satisfactory for controls and actually good for compliance overall, which is obviously positive in terms of progress. We also, on page 35, have the update on Section 106 monitoring. Again, another area that had received limited assurance in 22-23, so it's pleasing to see a movement to a satisfactory assurance opinion and a number of those actions being implemented as at the time of this year's audit. Also, another follow-up from a limited assurance report from last year was on page 39, which was looking at compliance regimes around our corporate assets, so looking at things like gas safety, electrical installations, all of those key controls we'd expect to see in terms of our corporate operational properties. Members will recall that at the previous meeting I brought you a paper on leased assets, which was a limited assurance from the 22-23 financial year. This is looking back on progress since the 21-22 financial year, which received a limited assurance for operational assets as opposed to our leased assets. Also within the reports that have been finalised are a few areas where we did identify areas of weakness, and I'd just like to give the committee some context to some of those findings. So, for example, the audit on contract management within public health. This starts on page 34. So whilst we have clearly identified some issues around performance and areas that we'd like to see improved in terms of how those contracts are being delivered, before the audit was concluded, we were able to see that performance improvement plans were in place for the relevant contracts, and we were also able to see that some of that work was taken forward as part of a project group as well. We're also reflecting on the national picture on this one as well, because I think whilst we're identifying areas of poor performance, when you put that into the national picture, it's a question of whether it's around our contract management or whether it's actually a national issue. And that suggests that we're not actually a significant outlier in that area. So again, we tried to put the context into that as well. So it did receive a satisfactory assurance opinion upon finalising the report. Also wanted to mention to you on page 33, we had a report around local bank accounts in adult services. So obviously we do an annual report for you as part of our audit plan around main accounting. So as part of that, we're looking at things like bank reconciliations and the controls around management of bank accounts for corporate accounts, so those centrally held bank accounts. What we do also have, and what we've inherited from some of the service areas within adult services from the county council, are some local bank accounts which are being managed out in the services. So, for example, at a day centre, at a residential care home, they may have their own separate bank accounts that they obviously have to manage on a local level. So as we don't have sight of those centrally, we wanted to get some assurance around how those are being managed. So we visited a sample of properties, different schemes within adult services. At the time of the audit, we did highlight some weaknesses. We did identify some gaps because for a number of the accounts that we wanted to look at, there were not actually bank statements in place. They were not able to access them due to issues with bank mandates at that time. So this report initially was of limited assurance due to those gaps. Before we finalised the report, a lot of that information was obtained and some of the issues were addressed, with over 50% of the actions we'd recommended being implemented. So I was able to take assurance on that. I suppose from my perspective, I couldn't give assurance whilst I didn't have bank statements that there wasn't anything out there that we didn't know about that wasn't untoward. Once we'd received those statements, as I've said in the opinion here, we were able to give a greater level of assurance over the areas that had been addressed due to the actions that had been taken. So I just wanted to mention those couple in particular. Also within the pack on page 37, we had an audit on fleet and fuel. So for this audit, my background is in fraud investigation in particular as my area of specialism, and I have been involved in some high-profile fraud cases in relation to fleet and fuel. So when we looked at this audit, I really wanted to focus it in on fraud risks and how we're managing the risk of fraud in managing our supplies of fuel and access to fleet vehicles. So, as I said, that was the focus of the audit. During the audit, there were some controls in place. So we have acknowledged those and some areas that are good and they could be strengthened further. However, we did identify a number of weaknesses in the data that was available. So really what I wanted to do was perform some data analytics to really see if there was any outliers, anything that ought to be flagged. Due to the quality of the data, a lot of that work wasn't possible. So we've made some recommendations around improving that going forward and improving the control framework. And I'd also just wanted to mention this one to members of the committee because obviously within the internal audit team we also have a counter-fraud function, and I would like our fraud officers to work really closely with the team on trying to get some of this control in place. It's something that I'd like to bring back to the committee at some point as part of a fraud update as well. Also, just to mention, within the long list of reports, there is also the outcomes on some of our hosted key financial systems in relation to accounts payable, accounts receivable and debt recovery, which are hosted by Cambridgeshire County Council. Those are all of satisfactory or higher assurance opinions, so no areas to flag to you in particular in relation to those. So that's a quick run through of that section 3.1, but if members of the committee have questions on any of the particular audits within there, I'm happy to take those as well. Also within the report, there is a copy of the full 22-23 internal audit plan from page 44 through to page 51, with all of the audit statuses as at the time of writing this report. We have finalised further reports since this was produced. So, for example, main accounting, I can confirm, has been issued as final since I produced this report. That received a satisfactory assurance opinion. Any of those that weren't finalised in time for this paper, we obviously have to have a cut-off somewhere, will come to this committee as part of my progress reporting going forward. So you will receive all of those outcomes. Also within the report is an update on implementation of audit recommendations. So since the last committee meeting, we've confirmed that 29 actions have been completed, and that's summarised in table 2 on page 54 of your papers. Within that table, you will note that there are 2 that are high priority and over 3 months overdue. So I have provided full details of those in table 4 on the following page. These are the same 2 actions that I reported to you at the previous 2 committee meetings in my progress report. I am pleased to say that we do now have revised dates within the update. So members will note in the final column, we now have a revised date given for each of those. And we also have the latest update as at May as well for members' information. So that's a run through of the report, Chair, but as I say, I'm happy to take questions on any of the further detail.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Lee and then Councillor Eakins.
Thank you. Thank you for that report, Rachel. It's really interesting. 2 points. Firstly, contract management in public health on page 34-35. I just wonder, does anyone here know when the health scrutiny committees will start to meet? Because I believe that the corporate scrutiny committee has started to set dates, but not the health scrutiny committee. That's one point. That's not really for Rachel. That's for the officers, if possible. And then the climate change initiatives on page 38-39. Does the absence of action 20% through the time of the climate emergency resolution having been approved to the deadline of 2030, the absence of action in itself, is that not a cause for concern? That should be noted. Thank you.
Okay, before we go to Rachel, maybe Adele could help us on those committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the first committee meeting for the health scrutiny is the 11th of July. So that will be the first one. In the meantime, there's also scrutiny management boards starting to happen, so informal meetings with the chair and vice chairs to look at the forward plan for all of those committees and a piece of work ongoing with that, so that those committees can really get going with their forward plan of work.
Okay, did you have anything to add on that, Rachel? No?
Yeah, so on the, obviously I haven't got anything to comment on the first point, obviously Adele's addressed that. In terms of the climate change initiatives, so we sought to do this as more of an advisory piece of work, because I just wanted to gather assurances that would inform my annual report, as we're looking at later on the agenda today. Because the strategy that's in place was fairly new at the time, it's not really had a chance to embed. What I'd usually want to do as part of this audit is look at the strategy, look at the action plan, and then get assurances over progress that's been made, but it seemed a little bit too early days. So what I wanted to do was still recognise all of the other work that's happened in the absence of a formal strategy or action plan, and almost collate that for members of the committee, but also for my own use as well, for my own assurance purposes. So there is an assurance opinion on this one. It's more for information, really.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eakins?
Yeah, thanks. Page 37, when you was going on the use of fuel and oils cards and the bunkers, the fuel bunkers that we control. How's the fuel controlled out the bunkers? Because, I mean, obviously that's the easiest way of being, should we say, an unauthorised use being taken out without anybody actually standing there and watching.
Yeah, so through you, Chair. So essentially, this is where we're looking at the use of cards or key fobs to be able to access the fuel. So this is where we wanted to really use that data to do some analysis around which drivers associated with which vehicles. I look at MPGs and all of this to try and assess whether there's any outliers on certain types of vehicle. Due to the data that was available, that wasn't really possible to use it in that way. So that's why we wanted to strengthen that, so that we can make sure that everyone is accountable for the fuel. We can clearly see which vehicle it's associated with and follow it through that way. So hopefully that helps explain where we are at the moment.
Well, that's difficult if you get multi-users of the vehicles, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
And
yeah.
the second one is use on fuel cards, which obviously go through the garages. And most times, well, the norm is you input your mileage on the card as you go. So that's obviously not been happening in all aspects here. But what about the add-ons? The oil, screen wash, blue additive, and other purchases that can be purchased at the same time? How are they prevented or monitored?
Through you, Chair. I'd need to take that back because I believe the data we had was specific to fuel, but obviously we can have a look and see whether or not there's any way of taking that. I'm not sure if those purchases can be made for your fuel card or not, but we can obviously look into that and include that
Although
in
the fuel,
actions.
well, the fuel has a high price on it, but then it's equally as high for all the little extras that people book in and put on as well. If it's not monitored, then that's an easy outlet to get oil and blue and stuff like that disposed of.
Absolutely. No, I'll take that away.
Thank you. Councillor Jelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to refer to page 35 of the report, which talks about Section 106 monitoring. I had a meeting this morning with the clerk of Roscoe Town Council. I'm a member of the Roscoe Town Council. And we have a number of Section 106 agreements in our town, and we've been chasing for answers on all of the details of Section 106s, because, you know, we've got somewhere in the region of about £4 million that is due to be spent in and around Roswell from the Roswell North development and other developments. The meeting we had this morning with some of the information, we've got 2 Section 106s that have got 7 months before they expire. So we're now running around trying to get something done quickly within 7 months, which is a virtual impossibility. But, you know, these have got times when they expire. And I think the legacy we've had, fair enough, from, you know, the borough and district councils was that, you know, we should never be involved in Section 106. I thought the ethos of NNC was that members would be involved in deciding where Section 106 money goes. We've got big chunks of finance there for education, for healthcare, and we're having no say in it where it goes. So I think it's really important from this that we make sure that Section 106 is properly controlled and it's worked with all of the town and parish councils, because there's a significant amount of money that's going to be spent in that area. And the town and parish councils don't have a Scooby-Doo about what's happening. So I think this has highlighted it, Rachel, in the report, which is good. But I think going on from this, Chair, we need to make sure, you know, it says that they've actually done a comprehensive spreadsheet that includes all Section 106 agreements. Well, that'd be something that perhaps members could have a copy of that for their areas, so they understand where the money's going. But thank you for the report and highlighting it. But I think it's important we get on top of this.
Yeah, thanks. That's really good points raised there. I'll probably mention it afterwards when I've taken further questions. But I think some of these are on the border of being limited assurance. I think quite a few of these, and I'll maybe ask you questions about that. And you know, these are big risks, I think, here, and I think we've got to follow through. Maybe not, but we've got to make sure this follows through, and you know, these things are reported out, and we don't miss out on these monies because it's quite significant. Yeah. So I think we'll have some thoughts about what the actions need to be to make sure that happens. Maybe we'll pick it up directly outside of the meeting. It's more of a scrutiny action. But is this related to that point? Okay.
If I may just quickly add, is I might be under the misunderstanding, but as I understand it, is that we can go back to the developer to have the SO 106 reassigned to a different aspect. As what our money is normally assigned either for transport or for schools or for whatever and enhancements. But if that isn't possible, we can actually request it to be reassigned, and as long as we have their permission to reassign it, it can be done. I think that happened in Wellingborough once, where there was S106 money for a bus route and a bus stop and etc. and a turning circle, which never happened because the bus stop stopped. But it was it wasn't reassigned, although the developer would have allowed it, and in the end it was paid back. So if we can reassign that within 7 months, then they may be able to extend it. And I'm not too sure whether that's 100% correct or not, but I'm sure you could look into it.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do, we'll get Rob Harbour to report back on this. We'll ask him to do that. Just make sure I do these in the right order. I think it was Michael, and then Councillor Anslow, then Councillor Smith-Haynes. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just refer to page 31, which is on the adult safeguarding. And I think we obviously, when things are not going particularly well, we're very quick to say it's not going well. And this, just note that is a good reduction, but it's still very high. So I think we need to keep the pressure on there, and note that there's a note in there saying that, you know, the number of the backlog and the new referrals are increasing. So even though there's been a good reduction, it is still very high. So I know this is historic, so we have an organisational impact of moderate, and I would like, going forward, my personal opinion, that is a high risk to us, not a moderate risk. I'm not sure how the moderate or low and minor, etc., gets put on, but I can't really think of a higher risk thing for us than the safeguarding and obviously the children's welfare. So I would just like to say I would like that to be high risk, if people would agree with that, but it's good work so far, but there's a lot needs to be done, so we need to sort of congratulate but keep the pressure on.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Anslow.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, just 3 points actually, but picking up on the S106, yeah, there's an example, isn't there, in Wellingborough of a school being built, which is no longer needed, because when it was first agreed that that's how the money would be spent, the figures have changed, and now it was agreed at executive last week, I think, that building is offered to other schools in the town to go, to use the new building. So, yeah, S106 money, I think we need to know more. We want to know what and when and all the rest of it. I think that's really important, especially as it was mainly the borough councils, the former borough councils, who made the planning agreements, etc. But it's Northampton that's now taking it up. Yeah. I'd like to ask on page 38, to do with the climate change initiatives. Over 4,000 trees were planted. I'd just be interested to know how many were cut down.
Yeah, very good.
I'm saying that because obviously it's hot on the agenda in Wellingborough. It would be good to know. And the other one, I think it's about dates, about pushback on dates. It seems like everything's being pushed back. So I'm just, as an example, page 55, and I understand why there's been this pushed back on the original date being August 22 back to September 23. I do understand, but it worries me that a lot of things are being pushed back. And is that due to lack of staffing, possibly? Don't know.
Okay, would you like to comment on those, particularly on pushback on the dates?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So obviously in relation to page 55, we've got the revised dates in there. The content in the middle column on the status update really explains the reason for those delays. So I think in this particular case, it's not due to resourcing, although that has been a theme in some of the other audits. I think in this case, it's more around other issues that have come up that needed to be resolved before they could take this action forward. Yeah. So hopefully that provides a little bit more context on that one.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith-Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine goes back to the section 106 as well, echoing everything that Councillor Jerley has said. I represent Broughton Parish councillors are incredibly astute with what money is owed to them, and they are also very aware of the time constraints on when they can access this money. And they just seem to be constantly hitting a brick wall. They negotiate with Ian Boyes and Sarah Barnwell. They have agreements on what they're going to spend the money on. Then it goes all quiet when the planning goes in. And they will get us involved to ask what's going on, to nudge things along. And we may as well be talking to a brick wall. It's really difficult. And the Broughton Parish councillors are concerned they're going to lose the money because of our tardiness.
Thank you. So I think there's clear concerns here, and we've asked Rob Harbour to comment on this. We'll ask him to report to us because there seems to be some control. They've been flagged up, so you're accentuating the seriousness of those, and I think we'll ask for the reports back on those. I'm just checking if there's any other comments and queries. I think I'd make a couple of general ones. I did feel when I read through these, I was expecting some to maybe tick over into limited assurance, and I'll identify a few. The school's financial control. When you haven't got a point of reference, a financial manual, what are you measured against? I think that struck me as being quite a significant control issue. I'd like you to comment on that, and also on the contract management for the Children's Trust. I'm trying to identify some themes here, and there's some recurring themes with follow-ups and things like that with the Children's Trust. So I'm trying to knit those things together. They're the two I felt that were maybe on the borderline. I'd like your comments on those. And then the two where I had alarm bells, and even though they're the fleet and fuel is only about £1 million a year, which is obviously a huge amount of money, but from a logistics background, that was horrendous controls. I couldn't imagine them being any weaker. I think we need some pretty rapid assurance that those controls are put in place, because it's just asking for a fraud to be committed, and people do. And anywhere where fuel isn't controlled, it goes. So that was one alarm bell, and the other one was on the contract management side. I think you explained that more by about there was an inherent risk there which is recognised nationally. There's quite a few points there. So there's 4 points, 2 on the border, and schools financial control and Children's Trust knitting them together, and the 2 alarm bells. I wonder if you could comment on those, please. The 2 alarm bells being contract management and fleet and fuel.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. So as I said earlier, there were a number of reports that some of them I picked out specifically, including the public health contract management and the fleet and fuel audit, which had initially been limited assurance at the draft report stage, but based on some other information we'd received had gone up to satisfactory based on some of the wider assurances we could take from the information provided or the progress made in implementation actions. But I think I would agree as well in terms of the school's financial controls. There was, as you say, there's a scheme for financing schools that essentially sets out the framework of how finances should be managed within the schools. Within that, however, it regularly refers to a manual, and the manual isn't currently in place. So obviously for further detail, there's not further information available. So we have obviously flagged that early on in the audit, and that's work on that is underway. But what we did as the main part of this audit is actually going out to a sample of schools. So we went out to, I believe it was 7 schools in total, and did a very comprehensive finance audit, which covered accounts payable in terms of invoicing and orders, income recovery, payroll, main account, all of the key controls you'd expect to see. It was a very comprehensive review, and actually on the basis of that, whilst we did identify a number of areas, and obviously it was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the findings, overall we were generally reaching a satisfactory assurance opinion in that the controls were operating, so staff did have an idea of how to apply those controls, but obviously there were some inconsistencies sometimes in the approach. Doesn't necessarily mean one is right or wrong, but we just need some comparisons and make sure we have a consistent line on how things should be done. So that manual will set out that guidance and make sure that it's consistent with the Council's own requirements as well in terms of our own scheme of financial management and financial regulations. So, as I say, that was the key area there. In terms of the Children's Trust contract management, this is an audit that we've done every year so far, so twice now. We did the audit last year, obviously we visited it this year. Linking back to what we were talking about in terms of the overdue audit recommendations, as you can see, the recommendations still remain open. So as a result, it's probably not surprising that the assurance opinion hasn't changed. And we actually concluded that all of the actions we raised last time remain open. So we didn't make any new recommendations this year. It's essentially, we reiterate what's already there. We haven't set new dates, so they will still continue to say the original dates that you were brought to the committee initially. So it's not a case of refreshing it and then it looks like a new audit. We will continue to follow those up. But on that basis, because of, as we mentioned earlier, some of the other issues that have come up that needed to be resolved before we knew where we were going with the intelligent client function to get some of these controls in place has obviously hindered the progress that we'd expected to be made in terms of those actions. So I think that hopefully provides some context around those two. In terms of the two of the public health contract management and the fleet and fuel, obviously I've mentioned those earlier as well, and they do cause me some concerns in terms of the areas of weakness. With the public health contract management, as I said, given that they have the performance improvement plans in place before we finalise the report, the new contracts were in place with those associated performance measures. We also had this project group that was up and running. I think that gave us the assurance that we were able to go up to a satisfactory assurance opinion. Also, as I say, in light of the national picture as well. And the fleet and fuel, obviously, I've commented on. And I would also echo the concerns. As I say, it's something that I've seen go wrong on a large scale in some cases that I've investigated in the past. So I certainly want to work with the service areas to strengthen those controls. But I did want to recognise that they are doing something. It's not just there's nothing there. They're working with the data that they have, but really that data needs to be improved, and we need to be a lot smarter with how we're using it going forward as well.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, I'll go to the recommendation, which is that we note the progress report attached as Appendix 1 and consider the main issues arising. So if we could look for a proposer for that, please. Councillor Marks and Councillor Anslow seconding. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. That was unanimous. Now that moves us on to agenda item 7, which is the annual internal audit report and opinion for 22-23, and I'll hand over to Rachel again to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is essentially what my team and I work towards all year, to be able to bring you this annual report and opinion. The annual audit plan that we bring to you, we discuss and consult with you on, is designed to be able to inform my annual opinion on the Council's governance, risk and control framework. So this is ultimately the result of that work over the year. So the intention of this annual opinion is that it should inform the Council's annual governance statement for the year. So that obviously forms part of the Council's financial accounts. So this should be a key part of your assurances for that. So obviously as a committee, you want to make sure when you receive that annual governance statement that this is consistent with what you're receiving in terms of this opinion as well. So just briefly running through the report, the opinion, my opinion is set out on pages 65 and 66 of the papers. The opinion, and we've alluded to it in the earlier item, is of satisfactory assurance. Now, I appreciate that the last meeting we discussed the assurance ratings and we agreed that we would be changing those going forward. I wanted to ensure we were consistent and across the board in terms of the 22-23 audits, so we remained with those assurance opinions and definitions. So that's what's been applied. Obviously, the vast majority of these audits had already been concluded before we changed the internal audit charter. So going forward, we will be getting rid of the satisfactory assurance, which I know a number of us have some issues with the wording on that, but that's what has been applied throughout this report. So just to clarify that. So the rest of the report, obviously that's the opinion. The rest of the report sets out the basis for that opinion, what's informed my opinion in terms of the audits that we've conducted and any other sources of assurance that I've taken into consideration. So the opinion is set out, as I say, under section 2, and basically within the opinion, we've referred it to satisfactory assurance in the third paragraph there, which is essentially the overall opinion. That's based partly on the audit reports that have been, primarily on the audit reports that have been finalised during the year. So Obviously, I bring your progress reports to you, which gives you the outcomes of all of the audits throughout the year. So you have received the outcomes of the vast majority, well, all of these as of today. But I've provided a summary in Table 1 and further detail in Table 3 on page 69 of each of the audit reports that were finalised and the outcomes of those and the 3 assurance opinions. And also just a note of which committee they came to for reference. So I'm happy that, based on the audits that were concluded during the year, that I have sufficient basis to reach my opinion. So I'm able to give you that assurance in line with the public sector internal audit standards. I have given some limitations on my opinion, and those are set out within the box as well for clarity. Within the financial controls opinion, for example, I have had to caveat that we have not yet received the assurance opinions for our key financial systems in relation to payroll, pensions and user access controls. So these are systems that are managed outside of North Northamptonshire Council. They are delivered for us by West Northamptonshire Council in this case. We've not yet received audit reports on those systems for 22-23, so I'm not able to give you an assurance over those. I can't put my name to any assurance over that at this time. I'd also reference later within the report, we talk about the Children's Trust, which obviously delivers our children's services. The annual internal audit report and opinion for the Trust is not expected until August. So again, I'm not able to factor that into my opinion at this time. So I've just given a reference to that within my opinion, that obviously my assurance does not cover that area. I have referred, obviously, we do have other sorts of assurance in relation to the Children's Trust, and obviously we've got a later agenda item on this, so we do have things like the regulators' inspection reports, which do help to inform the opinion and again should impact on your annual governance statement opinion. So over the year, we were able to say that 94% of audits opinions that were given were either satisfactory or above, which supports the overall satisfactory assurance opinion. As we've said before, satisfactory doesn't mean that it's perfect. It means that there are areas for improvement. There are some areas where there is areas of good compliance, so we've recognised that during the year, but there's also a number of areas that need to be improved. One of the other things that does impact on my assurance opinion is the action that's taken by management in response to any findings. So I take that into consideration. And for that reason, I've given an overview in Table 4 on page 72 on the implementation of audit recommendations during 22-23. So we made a grand total of 173 audit recommendations, which resulted in agreed management actions during the year. Of those, 123 have been implemented, which represents 71%. The others obviously to come to you as part of the progress reporting, so you can see and hone in on any of those that cause concern once they get into that high priority and over 3-month overdue category. Just to note, obviously the 2 that are in that category are the 2 you've just seen in the previous agenda item. So the rest of the report really reflects on the performance of internal audit as a service, how we've delivered against our plan, how we've demonstrated that we've added value to the council. So an example of that is in Table 5 on page 73, where we've reflected on results from our customer satisfaction surveys. So at the conclusion of an audit, we issue a survey to the relevant director and lead manager to find out how they found the audit in terms of the coverage, the communication, the reporting and the recommendations. And I'm pleased to say that all of the responses during the year from the council have been of good or outstanding, which is really pleasing to see. We've also reflected on some areas of where we've added value during the year in Table 6, just something of areas where we've just generally worked with the council to try and embed good governance and risk management. And within pages 74 and 75, we also reflect on compliance with the public sector internal audit standards, where I have confirmed that we are operating in general conformance with the standards. We do have a quality assurance and improvement plan in place, which is a requirement of the standards itself. And my plan for this year is that we would focus that on in developing further work around data analytics. It's an area that a lot of internal audit teams are trying to get into a little bit more and make best use of that data. I obviously talked about fleet and fuel earlier, and I think that's where we could try and do almost 100% coverage on some audits rather than samples. If we can do analysis of the whole population, that would obviously give a greater level of assurance in some cases as well. We're also looking to try and embed some of the further areas in terms of promoting internal audit as well. So we're looking at doing a website and trying to reach out to service areas just to raise the profile of internal audit and make sure people know who to come to if they do need any advice or support. Finally, on page 76, there is an overview of counter-fraud referral activity that's come through my team and any outcomes that we're able to report on at this time. So obviously we do continue to monitor the fraud referral box and refer things as we need to or investigate them as appropriate. And I think that's a run through of the report, Chair, and I'm happy to take any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive update on the background to that opinion. Councillor Eakins, thank you.
Just a quick one. Not that we've taken it, there's a tremendous amount of work on here, and it's all fairly good. On page 69, where we're talking about your matrix, going back to that, like the housing situation that we're in, you've got too limited, and then it's a moderate risk, and then the same with voids. But surely that should be more of a higher risk than moderate, unless you use what sort of, without saying, do we know what sort of matrix you use to calculate your risk assessments?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So it's something that we looked at the previous committee meeting around the internal audit charter going forward and how we want to define these. But as I say, we're using the previous versions for the purpose of this report. So in terms of the organisational impact, and it's one that sometimes my team have had to grapple with when they're new to the team as well, as to what we actually mean by that. So it's not the risk of the service generally, it's the risk posed by our findings. So it could be that we're looking at a really high risk area, so we could be looking at a safeguarding risk or something like that, where if it went wrong and we gave a limited assurance, it would be major in terms of the organisational risk. But if we've looked at it and it's actually okay, the risk posed by the findings isn't major, it's moderate, it's minor potentially. We obviously take a consideration on that in terms of in each case, apply what nature of the risk is and how we think what we think is posed by the findings of the audit. So based on the findings on these ones, we felt that moderate was the right assurance opinion for organisational impact. But as I say, it's in relation to those judgments. Okay, thank you. Just looking to see if any other members have got any questions or comments. It's an excellent report, and I think it knits it together clearly as to how you've drawn your opinion. But what I'm very concerned about is the limitations of scope, because you haven't been able to cover everything that you want, and it's not something that was in our bailiwick, it's within others. We're looking at the 3 that you identified from West Northants, so we don't have anything from there. And then we've got limitation of scope also for the Children's Trust. So I think they're quite significant issues. I'm extremely disappointed that the Head of Internal Audit for the West is not attending today. Members may remember that we were given assurances that she would attend any meeting that we wanted. And I was very pleased about that she said that. However, she's not attending today. And Janice, I understand that there's a reason behind that. Maybe you could help us out on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've spoken to the Chief Financial Officer for the West, and his view is that the internal auditor is the internal auditor to the Trust and therefore is responsible to the Trust for that audit. And if we have any queries on the audit, then the Trust will be able to support us in that role rather than the internal auditor coming to the Audit Committee of Northamptonshire. So, as I say, the view is that the internal auditor will, obviously as it is, the internal auditor to the Trust will attend the Trust's Audit Committee. But then if there's queries from this Audit Committee, then the Trust will seek to, as they are indeed for this next item, seek to attend to represent the findings there.
Thank you. I'm extremely concerned about that. I'm very grateful that Colin Foster and Andrew Tagg are turning up and will be presenting the next item, but which is all about sources of assurance. And one of those sources of assurance is internal audit. It's internal audit, it's external audit, it's external regulatory interventions in that area. So that's what I see as the assurance framework. And we have not got a key person who's involved in that attending. Now, I'm very pleased management have turned up, and I'm grateful for that. But you need that independent assurance, and I think it's very deficient. And when we write our annual report to Council, unless we get that assurance, then we've got a severe limitation on what we can say to them, because there's whatever that amount of business is the wrong word, whatever that amount of activity is, 150 million, and a huge risk in terms of safeguarding, it's not there at the moment. I'll come to Councillor Jelly and then Councillor Eakins. Rachel, I wonder if you could, I know you've been in contact with, on the internal audit side, could you update us on, I know you've told us they won't give us their internal audit opinion. What's your latest understanding of where they are in terms of internal audit? And I'll ask the management later, but I know you liaise with them, so you have an independent view of where it was at, what they're doing, etc. And I did have some particular follow-up items with the head of internal audit, and we haven't received those either. For example, we asked for sight of the engagement letter to see of the three audit reports, annual summaries. We had 3 of them. Which was the right one, and where's the engagement letter which sets that out? So I know you've spoken to her. Could you update us on where you got to with that, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the latest update that I had from the head of internal audit at West was that they were working to the end of May for their internal audits for the Children's Trust. I haven't had an update since then, and I've not yet received any final reports. So that's the latest update that I had. And I think that was as at, oh, if my computer's not frozen, I can confirm. That was as at the 5th of May.
Okay, so I mean, what that is the period from April 22 to March 23, and by May 23 we've got 0 audits reported. So I think that should give us cause for concern about how we get assurance, because we've got to give assurance to our governing body, and I think it's becoming difficult to do that when we've got that absence. I think 2 colleagues wanted to raise some points, Councillor Jelly and then Councillor Eakins. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I quite agree. I mean, in the report it says at the time of reporting, the annual report for the Trust has not been received, and the internal audit assignment for 2022-23 remains in fieldwork. But as an Audit and Governance Committee, surely we should have an opinion on that, and we should have some information on it rather than go, because this is going to be, what, nearly 18 months before we've had a full report. And that's really unacceptable.
Yeah, I think Colin and Andrew are kindly here, so we'll perhaps, it is a separate agenda item, but I think it's linked, so maybe with their forbearance we'll ask them a question on that when they present the next agenda item. Yeah. Councillor Eakins, did you have a question? Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, I'm going to cast my mind back to Northamptonshire County Council days when the Children's Trust was evolved, shall we say, or put upon us, is probably a better word. I was under scrutiny at that time, and when we had children's services in there, and we were asking specific questions over accountability and how much they were spending. And we knew that it was going to be spread between NNC and West as a equal parts by population, I believe. I think it's how it's worked out in the end. We were very concerned at the time when we said, what kind of assurances do we have over being accountable for your spending if you overwent budget? And I'm sad to say that the answer was none. You just have to pay us. And that was as it was, as short and sharp and blunt as that was. Now that does raise big concerns, because if we haven't got any accountability under what the children's services are spending and only have to keep funding it, which we actually gave another, I'm not sure, 10 million or share of £10 million recently, the audit part of it is essential. If we can't hold them accountable for what they're spending, you know, how can we be held accountable by the people who are paying the tax to fund it? Now, I'm as concerned as the chair is over this one here. And I don't see how somebody that can, or in receipt of circa £150 million a year plus, can just think that they're unaccountable for what they're spending and they're just free will to do whatever they want without actually coming to tell people what they're doing, or even showing their records of accounts on what they're spending it on. So I think that this committee, I don't know what powers we have, but I certainly think that they should be brought in and held to book, and we want to see this. We want to see where this spend is, to make sure that it's being spent in the appropriate manner and not being, dare I say, as it was previously at NCC, completely wasted.
Okay, I'll just see if there's any more comments or questions. Obviously, there's some quite significant concerns there. So I'll look to the recommendation. What we're being asked to do is note the annual internal audit report and opinion for 22-23 attached as Appendix 1, and I would add that there are significant limitations of scope on that. Some I expect will come through in terms of it's a matter of timing. Okay, so if I could look for a proposer for that, Councillor Level and then Councillor Lee, if we go to the vote, please. Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, that brings us, some might say neatly, onto agenda item 8. I don't know if we can get video of Colin and Andrew. That's working. So the
thank you, Chair. Can you see us okay?
Yeah, we can see you both okay. First of all, thank you for attending. It is appreciated. I presume you've heard most of what's been said, and we'll perhaps pick that up afterwards. But the first point of business is for us to receive your report, and I think Andrew is the author of this. So if I could ask Andrew to present this, and then we'll deal with that business, and then we'll perhaps pick up the other areas of concern we had, if that's okay with you, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Chair. With respect, could we do it the other way around, Chair, through you?
I'd rather not, because it's about the sources of assurance. So if we look at what your papers say, and that should set the framework, and then we can tie that, because that's what you're thinking. That's your thinking on what the sources of assurance are, and then we want to link it to what we've done, and I think that will wrap it up more neatly. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I think to open then with this we were asked at the last committee to produce a report on assurance to submit to the committee, which we did. We were attending 15 minutes notice, which we're very happy to do. As many colleagues in the room will know, that we've attended a great number of scrutiny committees, but continue to be held accountable for activity committed to do. So I wanted to make that clear for the record before we kick off. And also, my apologies, because I've said to be live in the room for scrutiny committees, wherever we're expected to be online.
Okay, you broke up a bit there. I think you had a very limited notice of the meeting, so my understanding was that should have come out a number of weeks ago. So we need to check into that to find out why that didn't get through to you. So I do thank you for turning up at very short notice. That is certainly, your attendance is always appreciated, especially when it's short notice, because you had little time to prepare. I know Andrew's done the report, so I'll hand over to Andrew now, and then we'll pick up at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. If I can just run through the report, there's the report and then the three appendices. Following the last meeting that we were attended, we were asked to produce, in some ways, a matrix of what the assurance and the additional assurance that was put in place that will be really pivotal in answering some of the questions that were previously raised around the sort of the finances. So what it does, it sets out the governance arrangements that are put in place, how we do that, what the formal reporting is there, and what the additional things that the trust has put in place, working with the councils, working with the ICF, to ensure that we've got the additional things that sit outside a traditional contract sum and a contract to client relationship, to have a more open and transparent relationship. And those are all sort of captured on that Appendix 2. If we move down to 2.5 and 2.6 of the report, that sets out what the contract arrangements are. And the contract arrangements are an OCG that happens on a monthly basis that covers both the financial performance of the trust and the key contract performance indicators that are captured again within the contract. The second element is then on a quarterly basis. That is then an additional strategic commissioning group that's attended by the chief executives, the lead members from each authority, and has got a wider cast list of there. What we've additionally put in is a series of additional frameworks that are adapted at Appendix 2 for that overarching governance map, because we share your views just around having that transparency around the spend and doing the sort of the granular level. So when we talk about granular level at spend, we have completely opened our financial reporting up to mirror exactly the financial reporting that is in Northamptonshire. So we have built that template with Mark Dickinson, the assistant Section 151 officer. We've had a granular detail at individual child level on the forecasting. So every single element of our budget is open to scrutiny. That is not what's set out in the contract. That's something that we've put in due to the pressures that we are sort of facing, which is facing both locally and nationally in relation to children's spend, where placements can be in excess of 700, 800,000 per year. So that's what we've done to have the additional assurance over and above what you'd have in a normal contracting. We will talk on a little bit later around the audit. We then have two internal committees within the trust. That's a PPQ committee and a finance, resources and audit committee. That's set out in section 3 of the report. In addition to the membership of the report, there's a council nominated non-executive director. That's Darren Hickman for the North. And there's also a council officer for Samantha Fitzgerald, who sits on the trust board and is party to all the papers that are received and all the items that we capture within there. Within the audit committee now, we have extended an open invitation to both chief internal auditors in both the North and the West to have access to every single paper that goes through that committee and be a member, if so right, to go to that committee to get an update on the progress of the audits and the audits that come through. So we have set those out in the different papers and then happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that update, Andrew. I'll look to members now for any questions. Councillor Marks, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, sir, your organisation agreed a budget, and I believe I'm right in saying that you're many millions of pounds over that budget. Now, you have mentioned one reason, that a placement for a single child can cost the best part of £1 million per annum, which is a bit strange. But in your own words, very briefly, what are the other reasons you're so many millions of pounds over budget? Thank you.
Do you want me to respond?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah, happy to do that. I'm not sure that's part of the report, but obviously happy to talk around the finances within there. The budget that was agreed, that was set based on 5 months actuals, which was requested by both councils. As part of the Q1 report last year in June, we flagged up a number of risks around there. We also flagged up the joint contributions that continue to be low in Northamptonshire traditionally from health and from education colleagues to the funding. So we flagged that up with a risk range to up to 12 million on the placements. As part of the contract sum negotiations, there was 7 million. We flagged up in both contract sum negotiation periods, in both 22-23 and 23-24, that there was a risk of further pressure that's shown across the entire councils and across the country, and recommended or proposed a placement reserve for 10 to 15% of that budget. That was requested in both contract sums. That's detailed in the both contract sum papers. That has what's transpired. So the only thing that we have seen is 3 areas of pressure. That's additional inflation and placement demand on the placement budget, additional inflation costs around transport that are mirrored exactly the same in the north and the west. The SLA that's provided through to us is provided initially by the West and now by both local authorities. So exactly the same issues that are faced by the councils around home to school transport are faced by the Children's Trust. The last part is legal, and that's the increasing costs of the additional inflationary costs and demand for the additional children in care. And the last element of the overspend was the pay award and the implementation of the National Pay Award. What we received in our budget was 2%. The National Pay Award was a flat sum of 1,925 or 3.5%. So those are the entire factors that are driving our demand, and we produce that on granular level. So it's either inflation or demand, and we flagged up these risks. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. This report has got value in that it sets out a governance map and it sets out various elements. What I misunderstood, because I understood we was going to get a sources of assurance. Where do you get your sources of assurance from? That's what we believed we'd asked. And I've just checked back to the minutes of that meeting, and what I was expecting to see, because you get lines of defence, as they're conventionally called in audit and governance, and so you get management, you get specialists, then you get internal and external audit, the third line of defence, which is key because it's independent and objective, and then you get the regulatory. That's not mentioned in here. I think the question that's been asked in this isn't what we was looking for. We was looking for what are the sources of assurance. And we consider one of those, just one of those, it's internal and external audit and the regulatory, because we check all the regulatory reports. We was assured in that meeting in February that the head of internal audit for West Northamptonshire Council would attend to give assurance to this committee as often as required. And now this isn't your fault, but we need that because we want to see the framework, we want to see the assurance framework, which I think we'll follow up and ask for another document to demonstrate that. But then the persons who do that, the internal and external auditors, we're not seeing that. So she's not attending, and it adds to the areas of concern. Now, I think the overspend is one thing. That's going to be dealt with in a different way. That's more of a scrutiny and so on and so forth. But I think those sources of assurance are still an area of concern for us because we can't see them. I know you must have had I know you had a recent audit committee which Rachel referred to. I understand there was no audit reports presented to that, from what I can see in publicly available documents. So,
yeah, may I
yeah.
have my hand up? So, if you need to finish that.
No, that's fine if you want to come in there. So that's my concern. I'm looking for sources of assurance, and this doesn't document it. And one of the key sources of assurance is now not attending this committee. So it's like doubly bad.
Okay. So first and foremost, I'm going to comment on this West Northampton audit. Happy to be involved in discussions with appropriate officers outside. As Andrew said in the presentation, the audit. So,
can we? I'm sorry, Colin. It's really difficult. The signal's bad, and I don't want to hear what you've got to say partially. So I don't know if you want to try again. If it doesn't work, I think we'll have to pause it and do it another day. And I recognise you've made the effort at short notice to come. But do you want to try again?
Is that better, Chair?
That's better. It's a slight echo, but I heard what you said there. If you try again, and I'll look to the committee to make sure they can hear and understand you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the room. Just bear
Yes,
with me.
yes, you can. I don't know if you can hear that.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
I can hear you now. I've got a little bit of an echo because I'm on two devices. Have you got an echo or is it okay?
A slight one, but it's okay. It works.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just from the start then, first of all, can't comment on the relationship between North and West, and I'm happy to be involved in conversations outside of the meeting with appropriate officers from the councils. As Andrew said during his presentation, we've opened up everything we can. There's never been an intention to hide anything. Indeed, we've been to every audit committee we've been asked to go to and shared appropriate detail. And if any officers attend one of those meetings and their feedback is that they would have expected something else to be presented, then I'd invite the officers concerned to share that with us at the time. The feedback you've just given, I wasn't aware of that feedback. So it'd be good to do that at officer level. If that'd be okay, then we can give a coherent picture to the council. I think that's a fair request. In terms of the paper that's presented, we were asked in the meeting to present detail of how our governance works, actually. So if that isn't what was represented in the minutes, I'm afraid we weren't here in the meeting when the minutes were signed off, but that was what was asked for from my recollection, and that's what's been provided. If there is further information that's required, then we can provide that. What I'd ask is that if that submission is for a committee meeting that we're required to attend, then it's quite difficult for us because we submitted what we was asked for. We've now had feedback that it wasn't what was asked for, and we only had 15 minutes notice of the meeting. And I'd much rather be there in the room with everybody so we can have the appropriate conversations. So if there is a further request for information, then we'll provide that, of course. And yeah, I hope we can work our way through, because what I know for sure is the only way, after the legacy issues that have been discussed by a number of committee members, that legacy is so poor. We will only create a system that works best for children in North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire if we can work together from a knowledgeable standpoint and develop services as best we can to help address a lot of the problems of the past. When a child is in care, you know, they could have been in care since they were 2-3 years old. You know, so that means they will have been in the system for a long time through the inadequacies that existed, and that's really worrying on a human level. And on a financial level, there are a number of costs that are still driving some of the support for children with very, very complex needs. Now, the way we can transform this is by working together to improve the system, and that includes openness and transparency, which we make every effort to provide. So my first point really is an apology if that hasn't been exactly as expected by the committee. I respect that view, and we will produce a further note as requested. And secondly, you know, we will attend committees that we required to attend in order to give the appropriate assurance.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think what we need to do is we'll reflect as well, and make sure we've been clear and unambiguous in what our requirements are, because obviously we've got to make sure we communicate properly with you and what we expect, because you know we're trying to we've all got the same goal here. So you know, we're not adversaries. We're in it together. So I've got a question from a colleague. So Councillor Anslow, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's probably picking up. It's always lovely when you come and attend the meeting, Colin, and it's face to face, and it would be nice if that could happen. But I think what the committee here would be interested in is to meet an officer that is responsible for the audit, so that we're able to ask them specific questions about how the money's spent, etc. You know, and about the assurance we have that you've got things in place that you should have. So, is that something that could happen?
Thank you very much for your kind words, Councillor. And I do actually enjoy coming to the committees as well, because some of the perhaps challenges of the past where there wasn't members I know didn't necessarily feel an openness towards answering questions, which I always do try and do. Sometimes it can be a challenge for all of us, but if we all play it with a straight bat, get to a more sensible place. In terms of the audit itself, the way the contract is set up is our audit delivery partner is West Northamptonshire Council. And I think there's going to be some discussions offline about how that can happen going forwards. One idea that did occur to me is we do have a chair of our Audit and Governance Committee, who is a non-executive director. And so we could perhaps ask if Hilary, who's that person, could come along and who can sort you as chair of that committee, perhaps. That's something we can control and we can speak to Hilary about. The accountable officer internally is Andrew, who's in the meeting, but we obviously have our external audit partners as per the contract.
Okay, yeah. I mean, part of this is for us to take up with WNC. There's, you know, that's delivered by them, so we need to manage that relationship. You know, that may involve yourselves as well, because it's being done for and on behalf of you. I'm content with what's been raised to this point. I don't know if other colleagues want to raise anything. If not, I thank you for your attendance. Sorry, Councillor Jelly's got a point to raise. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Colin and Andrew, for attending this afternoon. I appreciate what you're saying, and you've come in at short notice, so I fully understand that. But I think from an elected member's point of view, and talking to local residents, and, you know, we get messages saying, oh, there's 20 million overspend on the children's this, that and the other. I think from my point of view as an elected member, it would be good to understand what your pressures are that you face day in and day out trying to deliver the Children's Trust. What we can do as a committee to possibly help you with that, and to have a full understanding of where you think the pressures lie in the future. Are they going to increase? Are they going to subside? Whatever. But I think that would be good from my point of view, and possibly the committee, if we could have an understanding what it is and how you have to deal with it. Is that all right?
If I may, Chair?
Yeah, if you'd like to come back on that. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Councillor Jelly. And we're very happy to come to another committee and talk in more detail about those pressures. Andrew gave a brief overview a moment ago, but no problem to go into the detail. That would be a really good discussion. So yes, happy to do that. I think the point about overspend versus demand-led pressure, and I think in talking to our wider communities, it's important to note that, because when we originally set the contracts and we discussed that very point, and we expected there to be a significant pressure as is being experienced nationally. For that then to be reported as an overspend that isn't in control isn't exactly the case. And as Andrew said, we could talk about on a child level data what's driving the cost that we're experiencing. And many other authorities in the, well, all, so I understand it, are under similar pressure because you have to get the right support for children. The difference is when some authorities will say we're overspent, we're not overspent, depends on what the base budget was in the first place. And so what the challenges we've faced are very much demand-led pressures. But happy to do an item on that at a future meeting. If that helps, Councillor Jones.
Okay, well, thank you for your reconfirmation of your commitment to work with us. It's appreciated. We've got to go away and make sure we make the communications clear and give you proper notice, and something must have broken down there. So given that, we thank you for that report. I think we'll follow up with what we would like another one in relation to sources of assurance, and we'll take up the West Northamptonshire point directly with them. So the recommendation for this agenda item is that we note the report of Northamptonshire Children's Trust attached as Annex 1, which sets out the governance and reporting arrangements for the Trust. Can I look for a proposer for that, please? Councillor Jelly and the seconder, Councillor Anslow. If we could go to the vote, please. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. That, I think, is everything on that agenda item, so you're welcome to stay if you wish. That's entirely up to you. If not, we'll move on.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. We'll move on to agenda item 9. There's no exempt items. There's a couple of points to update the committee on, though. First of all, I'll look to Janice to update us on a matter for awareness in relation to the Move It data breach and the impact on NNC. If you could give us the background to that and where we are as an organisation, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good to see Adele's here as well, because I think she might have more up-to-date information than me following meetings this morning. So, yeah, as you may be aware, nationally, internationally, there's been a breach of the prominent piece of software called Move It. Now, that piece of software is responsible for transferring data between one system and another system, and it moves not only specific personal data, it can also move financial transactions such as backs payments, etc. You know, for instance, our housing benefits payments. So it's quite an important and integral piece of software, and it's used by quite a number of organisations. So you'll have seen those organisations within the wider news that have been impacted. We have been impacted at Northamptonshire as a result of this Move It data breach. Not for the systems that we actually do ourselves, but the fact we buy a support service in from another local authority who use the Move It software, and they use our data, obviously, as part of doing some of those transactions. So we've had notification from that organisation, from that council, that this breach has occurred. We've taken all the steps that we need to do under our data protection requirements, which also includes notification of the Information Commissioner's Office for that data breach, also notified insurance covers, etc. But I think one of the main things that's important about the fact making contact with those individuals that have also been the subject of the data breach, which the council has been working hard to do. I know initially emails have gone out, and there's also an email that we've set up back here to say that if you've got any concerns, to contact us as part of the council. But the main data breach for us in terms of that risk was around an e-procurement system that was running through Move It. As you can imagine, that does have quite a bit of personal data on there. So those data subjects have been contacted. We'll also give them advice about how they can help secure their data going forward as a result of this, which has come from the National Cyber Security team from that website, so linked into that, and also looking at perhaps providing wider support as well. And I don't know if that wider support's gone in yet, Adele, or not, around looking at another contract, weren't we, to support individuals getting wider support as well as part of that. So we're working through that. We're working through our processes and procedures that address that, and we're making sure we keep everybody up to speed. We've also sent notifications around to all staff, just to make all staff aware as well. And I think members have also had a direct communication on that item too. So perhaps, Adele, if there's anything that's more up to date that you need to update on that, thanks.
Thank you, Janice. Just with Experian, so we are looking at getting Experian Identity Plus, but that's still ongoing. So we'll be hopefully emailing out to all of the staff and those affected within the next few days. And we're also writing to them in person as well. So whilst we've used email addresses, we're also writing through letters as well. But no, apart from that, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that update. I don't know if members have got any questions. There's a couple of further points. I'm grateful for Paul attending it always seems to be manana with the Grant Thornton audit, but I don't know if there's anything you'd like to update us on your work. You did it briefly in the audit section, but I think it'd be useful for you to give us a wider brief as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I kind of briefly mentioned where we are with the 21-22 audit. So I'll just recap here. We've got resources in place to do the 21-22 audit alongside West Northamptonshire's from the beginning of July. Those resources run until the end of the year, so our intention is to finish 21-22 and then move straight into 22-23. So it's quite a long-standing task, and the audit team don't realise that it'll probably go into next year as well. Nationally, there's a couple of issues that I wanted to bring to your attention. As you're aware, the 21-20 for pensions, the 21-22 triennial review has been completed. That came up with some differences between the IS19 reports that you've been given. Normally, this isn't an issue because the 21-22 audits are normally signed off by the time the triennial review is finished. However, this year, as you'd appreciate, there is a number of audits that are still ongoing, and it did come up with some differences. Grant Thornton have come up with an approach, and what we'll be asking you to do is get an updated IS19 report that takes into account the changes in the demographic information. You're in, well, I would say the lucky situation that you don't have to compare it to your current draft report and decide whether you need to amend your draft accounts, because you'll be, so I've spoken to officers and you'll be incorporating the new report into your draft accounts. The second one is about, as you're aware, nationally, there's discussions going on about the audit backlog in the public sector. Those discussions are ongoing. They're trying to sort out how they're going to do it. There are some unique proposals that I won't go into, but I think those discussions are still ongoing. I think because you've obviously got the 2021 Corby audit that's still outstanding, and then going on to North Hampshire, you've got 21-22. I think the focus at the moment is those audits for councils that go back to 18-19 and 19-20 that are still outstanding, and they're the focus of trying to get those done. So I don't think you're under any scrutiny at the moment, and obviously for 2021 with the Corby, you've got a plan of action and a timescale to get that finished. And hopefully by the time they come looking at 21-22, we'll be well progressed with that.
Oops, thank you for that update. That's very helpful. Just one final point. Colleagues will remember that we do an annual report to Council on the activities of this committee. That will probably go to Council meeting later this year. One thing we need to do as a result of that is formally do a self-assessment of our performance. We did that at pace last year and quite late in the day. Councillor Harrison and myself did it. I think we should endeavour to do that much better this year, and I'd like to get some. I don't think it should be myself. I mean, the vice chair's only been here a short time, but I don't think it should be myself or the vice chair anyway. So what I'd like to do is get some volunteers to work with Rachel, and I'd like a Labour member, a Conservative member, and an independent. I think could be appropriate if everyone's in agreement with that. So look to Labour colleagues. Would you be willing to put yourself forward for that thing?
Yes, I'd love to.
Thank you. And then if, Michael, you'd be prepared to help in that, thank you. And then is there anyone else who would like to be? Councillor Jelly, thank you very much. I think Rachel's got some good background information and can guide and steer that, and hopefully it'll be much more comprehensive because it was limited reviews last year, so we've got a bit more of a run-in. Okay, so thank you. That brings to a conclusion all the business of the committee. I think if there's nothing else to raise, I'll draw the meeting to a close at 17 minutes past 4. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you everybody else for attendance. Cheers.